Excuse me? Who even gave you this job? You clearly don't know what I ordered.
It's a flat white with oat milk, just like the ticket says. I made it
I
myself.
asked for a cappuccino. Do you hear a single word I say?
I hear you.
Ladies,
That's
let's
why
keep
I'm
calm.
March 15th, 2024. Margaret Chen had been dead for 6 hours. At least that's what her ex-husband believed when he sent the final threat. Karen Brennan stood in the executive bathroom, reapplying her lipstick, rehearsing the speech that would destroy another woman's career. She'd perfected her technique. Find their weakness, exploit their insecurity, watch them crumble. What Karen didn't know was that the janitor mopping the floor behind her had built the company she was terrorizing. The woman she'd spent 3 weeks mocking for her scarred face. The woman she'd called too ugly to work here. Maggie Chen had survived a man who tried to erase her with his fists. She'd built an empire while hiding in shadows, and now she was about to teach Karen Brennan what real power looked like. The night Margaret Chen stopped being invisible, the night she remembered that sometimes the only way to protect the wounded is to become the weapon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Henderson woman needs to go, Karen murmured to her reflection, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her designer blazer. Too many sick days, makes the other employees uncomfortable with all that damage. She touched her own unblemished cheek, as if the mere thought of Sarah Henderson's burn scars might be contagious. Maggie's jaw clenched. Sarah Henderson, 34, chemical engineer, brilliant mind trapped in a body that bore witness to a lab accident that wasn't her fault. Maggie had hired her specifically because she knew what it meant to be judged by scars instead of substance, because she remembered what it felt like to be called a monster. The bathroom door swung open, and Rebecca Torres entered Maggie's VP of operations, though they'd never met face to face. Rebecca paused when she saw Karen, her expression carefully neutral. Professional survival instinct, Maggie recognized it immediately. Rebecca, Karen's voice dripped false warmth. I was just thinking about our conversation regarding the new hire, Angela Walsh. I think we need to reconsider her placement. Rebecca's shoulders tensed. Her qualifications are exceptional, top of her class at MIT, groundbreaking research in. I'm sure her mind is wonderful, Karen interrupted, examining her manicured nails. But you saw her during the interview. That birthmark covering half her face? Clients will be distracted. It's not personal, it's business. Maggie's knuckles went white around the mop handle. Angela Walsh, 26 years old, the same age Maggie had been when David Chen first told her she was too ugly to show her face in public. The same age when she'd started believing him. I'll find her a position in the back office, Rebecca said quietly, and Maggie heard the defeat in her voice. Another brilliant woman banished to the shadows. Perfect. Karen's smile was razor sharp. Oh, and Rebecca, make sure that new janitor knows to avoid the executive floors during business hours. Someone that disfigured shouldn't be where clients might see her. The words hit Maggie like physical blows. 23 years of building this company, of creating a place where women like her could thrive, and Karen Brennan had turned it into another hunting ground. Rebecca left without another word, and Karen returned to her mirror worship. Maggie continued mopping, invisible in her gray uniform, watching the woman who'd weaponized beauty against the wounded. But something else nagged at Maggie's mind, something beyond Karen's casual cruelty. How had the death threats known about the scar above her left breast, the one shaped like a crescent moon? David had carved it there during their final fight, and only 3 people knew about it: herself, the emergency room doctor who'd stitched it, and David. The doctor was dead. Had been for 8 years. David was supposed to be dead too. The private investigator's report had been definitive. Car accident outside Portland. Body burned beyond recognition, but DNA confirmed through dental records. Yet the latest threat received just this morning had described that scar in intimate detail, had promised to finish what was started and carve the rest of the moon. Karen finally left, her heels clicking against marble like gunshots. Maggie waited 30 seconds before pulling out the burner phone she'd bought specifically for this investigation. She scrolled to the encrypted message that had arrived at 3:47 a.m., the one that had convinced her to fake her own death. The broken doll thinks she can hide in her tower, but I know every crack, every flaw. Starting with the crescent moon I carved above your heart. Time to finish my masterpiece. Tonight your empire burns with you in it. Her hands trembled, the writing style, the specific references to her scars, the pet name David had used, Broken Doll. It was impossible, but the evidence was becoming undeniable. Maggie looked around the opulent bathroom, at the company she'd built as a sanctuary for the scarred and broken, now corrupted from within. Karen Brennan wasn't just a cruel executive. She was a weapon, precisely aimed at everything Maggie held sacred. But weapons needed handlers. And if David Chen was somehow alive, if he'd spent 23 years orchestrating this psychological torture while she thought she was free, Maggie Chen had died today, officially and completely. The death certificate was already filed, the will executed, the funeral arrangements made. As far as the world knew, the reclusive billionaire had suffered a heart attack in her penthouse, alone and unmourned, which meant Margaret the janitor was free to do what Margaret the CEO never could. She was going to hunt down everyone who'd turned her sanctuary into a slaughterhouse, starting with Karen Brennan. And if David Chen was truly alive, if he thought 23 years of hiding in shadows had made her weak, he was about to learn that some monsters were made by necessity. Some monsters were made to protect the innocent, and some monsters had been patient enough to build an empire before they struck back. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the employee database she'd memorized long ago. Angela Walsh's photo stared back at her brilliant eyes above a port wine birthmark that covered the left side of her face like spilled wine on pale silk. In the photo, Angela was smiling, but Maggie recognized the careful angle, the practiced positioning. The same way Maggie had learned to hold her head to hide the worst of the scarring. 26 years old, MIT graduate, revolutionary research in sustainable energy that could change the world, and Karen Brennan wanted to hide her in a back office because clients might find her face distracting. Maggie's thumb traced the phone screen, remembering her own face at 26, before David's final lesson in obedience, before she'd learned that some prisons were built from shame rather than bars. She'd been beautiful once, not stunning, but pretty enough that David had chosen her from all the other graduate students in the engineering program. Pretty enough that his interest had felt like validation instead of the first move in a carefully orchestrated destruction. "You're lucky I love you despite how you look," he'd whispered after that first time he'd hit her, cradling her swollen face with hands that could transform from gentle to violent in heartbeats. No one else would want damaged goods. By the end, she'd believed him completely. The bathroom door's hydraulic hiss announced another arrival. Maggie looked up to see Sarah Henderson entering, her reflection fracturing across the wall of mirrors. The chemical burns that had destroyed the right side of Sarah's face caught the light like abstract art painted in scar tissue, beautiful in its survival. Sarah moved to the sink beside where Maggie worked, careful not to make eye contact. The unspoken rule of the wounded acknowledge without staring, exist without imposing. "Excuse me," Sarah said quietly, washing her hands with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent years in laboratories. Her voice carried the slight rasp of someone who'd breathed fire and lived to tell about it. Maggie nodded, continuing to clean the already spotless mirror. In its reflection, she studied Sarah's face, seeing past the scars to the exhaustion beneath. The weight of constantly proving herself worthy of space in a world that judged books by their covers. "Bad day?" Maggie asked softly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Janitors weren't supposed to engage, they were supposed to be invisible. Sarah's hands stilled under the water. "Is it that obvious? Takes one to know one." For a moment, Sarah's eyes met Maggie's in the mirror. Recognition passed between them, not of identity but of shared experience, the kinship of the wounded. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fighting so hard to belong somewhere that doesn't want you." Maggie's chest tightened. This was what David had stolen from her, not just her face, but her sense of belonging anywhere. What Karen Brennan was now stealing from Sarah, from Angela, from every woman who dared to exist in a body that didn't meet impossible standards. "It is worth it," Maggie said, turning to face Sarah directly. "You belong here. Your mind, your work, that's what matters." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected kindness from a stranger. "Thank you. I needed to hear that today." After Sarah left, Maggie stood alone among the mirrors, surrounded by infinite reflections of herself. The fluorescent lights carved harsh shadows across her scarred features, and for a moment, she was 26 again, staring at her destroyed face in a hospital bathroom, wondering if she'd ever feel human again. She'd built Stratton Industries as an answer to that question. Every hire had been deliberate, every policy crafted to protect women like Sarah, like Angela, like the 26-year-old girl she'd once been. She'd created a sanctuary where brilliance mattered more than beauty, where scars were seen as evidence of survival rather than failure. But sanctuaries only worked if the predators stayed outside. Maggie pulled out the burner phone again, rereading the morning's threat. David's words, David's cruelties, echoing across decades. If he was alive, if he'd somehow orchestrated this corruption of everything she'd built. The phone buzzed. New message. "Enjoying your new job? Cleaning toilets suits you better than boardrooms. Though I suppose janitors and CEOs have something in common, they both know where all the dirt is hidden." Maggie's blood went cold. Whoever was sending these messages knew where she was, knew about her disguise, had been watching her. The bathroom suddenly felt smaller, the mirrors like prison walls reflecting her vulnerability back at her infinitely. But underneath the fear, something harder was crystallizing. She'd spent 23 years building walls to protect the wounded. Now it was time to hunt the hunters. Stop shaking, broken doll. It doesn't suit the CEO of Stratton Industries. Though I suppose you're not much of a CEO anymore, are you? Hard to run a company when you're dead. Attached to the message was a photograph. Maggie stared at the image, her breath catching in her throat like broken glass. It was her taken just moments ago in this very bathroom, surrounded by mirrors, her scarred face clearly visible under the harsh fluorescent lights. But it wasn't the invasion of privacy that made her world tilt sideways. It was what else was in the photo. Behind her reflection, barely visible in the mirror's background, was a shadow. A figure standing in the doorway she hadn't heard open, watching her with the patience of a predator who'd been stalking his prey for decades. The shadow had David's build, David's posture, the slight favor of his left shoulder from where she'd fought back once, 23 years ago, and he'd fallen down the stairs. Maggie spun around, but the bathroom was empty. The door was closed. The only sound was her own ragged breathing and that relentless dripping faucet that suddenly seemed to echo like a heartbeat. Another message arrived. Did you really think a car accident would stop me? That burning my face off would make us even? You took my life, Margaret, my career, my reputation, my future, all because you couldn't keep your mouth shut about our private business. The phone slipped from her, nerveless fingers clattering across the marble floor. The sound ricocheted off the mirrors like gunshots, and suddenly she was back in their apartment 23 years ago, David's voice following her from room to room as she tried to escape his rage. You destroyed everything, Margaret. Told them I hit you like some common criminal, made them fire me from the university, made them choose between us. His voice echoed in her memory, clear as if he were standing beside her. But I had years to think about it, years to plan while you built your little empire on my suffering. The bathroom door's hydraulic hiss made her jump, but it was only Rebecca Torres returning, her face creased with worry. Are you all right? Rebecca asked, seeing Maggie kneeling on the floor, her face white as bone. You look like you've seen a ghost. Have I? Maggie thought wildly. She scrambled for the phone, her cleaning supplies scattered around her like evidence of a crime scene. I'm fine, she managed, her voice strangled. Just clumsy. Rebecca knelt beside her, helping gather the scattered items. Listen, I don't know what Karen said to you earlier, but don't let her get to you. She's cruel to everyone, but especially to women like us. Women like us. Rebecca had noticed Maggie's scars, had categorized her automatically as one of the wounded. The recognition should have been comforting, but instead it felt like exposure. What do you mean? Maggie asked. Rebecca's hand went unconsciously to her own throat, where Maggie now noticed the faint white lines of old scars, usually hidden by carefully chosen clothing. Women who've survived things, Rebecca said quietly. Women who know what it's like to be judged by our damage instead of our worth. Karen has a particular hatred for us, like our existence personally offends her. The phone buzzed again in Maggie's hand. Tell Rebecca I said hello. Tell her I remember her testimony too, how she helped convince them you were telling the truth about me. I remember everyone who took your side, broken doll. They'll all pay for what they stole from me. Ice flooded Maggie's veins. Rebecca Torres, her VP of Operations. The graduate student who'd testified at David's disciplinary hearing, who'd admitted she'd seen bruises on Maggie's arms, who'd helped corroborate the abuse that had cost David his position at the university. Maggie looked at Rebecca with new eyes, seeing the familiar way she held her shoulders, the careful positioning that spoke of someone who'd learned to make herself smaller. Rebecca had scars of her own, hidden beneath professional clothing and 23 years of distance. Rebecca, Maggie said slowly, do you remember Professor David Chen? Rebecca's face went rigid. Why would you ask me that? Someone mentioned he's dead, Rebecca said sharply, standing abruptly. Car accident years ago, and good riddance. She paused at the door, her hand trembling on the handle. Some monsters should stay buried. After Rebecca left, Maggie remained on the bathroom floor, surrounded by mirrors that reflected her terror infinitely. The phone buzzed one final time. Tonight, Margaret, your penthouse. Our anniversary 23 years since you destroyed my life. Time to finish what we started. Time to complete my masterpiece. The penthouse, where Margaret Chen had supposedly died of a heart attack this morning. Where the world believed a reclusive billionaire had breathed her last breath, alone and unmourned. But David knew she wasn't dead. Had always known. Which meant he'd been orchestrating everything, the threats, the fake death, even her decision to go undercover. She hadn't been investigating. She'd been walking into a trap decades in the making. She tried to rationalize what was happening. David was dead. She'd seen the death certificate, the investigators' photos of the burned-out car, but the messages knew things only he could know. The pet names, the scars, the anniversary date of his dismissal from the university. Focus, she told herself. Think like the CEO you are, not the victim you were. But Margaret Chen, the CEO, was officially dead, buried under paperwork and a carefully orchestrated heart attack. Only broken, scarred Maggie remained, mopping floors and hiding from ghosts. The bathroom door opened again. This time it was Dr. Elizabeth Winters, the company's head of research and development. Maggie recognized her immediately, brilliant, accomplished, and bearing facial scarring from a lab explosion 5 years earlier that had nearly ended her career everywhere else. Elizabeth moved to the sink with practiced efficiency, but Maggie caught her reflection checking the door behind them, nervous, watchful. "Excuse me," Elizabeth said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Has anyone unusual been asking about the cleaning staff? Security, maybe?" Maggie's pulse spiked. "What do you mean? Someone called my office an hour ago, said they were conducting a security review, asked about the new janitor working the executive floors." Elizabeth's eyes met Maggie's in the mirror. "Asked specifically about a woman with facial scarring." The mop slipped from Maggie's nerveless fingers. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. I don't talk to people I can't verify." Elizabeth's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who'd learned not to trust easily, but it felt wrong, predatory. Before Maggie could respond, Karen Brennan's voice echoed from the hallway outside, growing closer. "I don't care what HR protocol says, Rebecca. That janitor makes me uncomfortable. There's something wrong with her." Elizabeth's face went white. She grabbed Maggie's arm urgently. "Whatever's happening, be careful. There are rumors women in this company have been receiving threats. Personal ones. Management's trying to keep it quiet, but—" The door burst open as Karen entered, her phone pressed to her ear. She stopped short, seeing Elizabeth, her expression shifting to predatory interest. "Elizabeth, perfect timing." Karen's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I was just telling Rebecca about our need to maintain professional standards. Some of our recent hires have been challenging for client relations." Elizabeth straightened, her scarred chin lifting defiantly. "My department's productivity has increased 30% since we hired Dr. Walsh. Her appearance has nothing to do with her genius." "Of course not," Karen said smoothly, "but genius can work from anywhere, can't it? No need to put clients in uncomfortable situations." Maggie watched this exchange, seeing her life's work crumbling in real time. The sanctuary she'd built was being dismantled by someone who spoke like David, who used his words, his casual cruelty dressed in corporate language. "I'm sorry," Karen continued, noticing Maggie for the first time. "I don't believe we've been introduced. You're the new cleaning person?" Maggie nodded, not trusting her voice. Karen's eyes lingered on Maggie's scars with clinical assessment. "Well, I suppose it's good that some people can find employment despite their limitations, though in the future I'd prefer if you worked after business hours. Clients don't need to see." She gestured vaguely at Maggie's face. "That's enough," Elizabeth said, her voice cutting through Karen's casual venom. "She has every right to work when she's scheduled." Karen's expression hardened. "Dr. Winters, I hope you're not becoming one of those difficult employees. It would be such a shame if your contract came up for review." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Elizabeth's hands clenched at her sides, but she said nothing more. Another brilliant woman silenced by fear. After they left, Maggie leaned against the sink, her reflection fractured across multiple mirrors. Karen wasn't just cruel, she was systematically targeting the exact women Maggie had fought to protect. And the threats Elizabeth mentioned, the security calls. The burner phone buzzed. "Did you enjoy the show? Karen's quite talented, isn't she? 23 years I've been training her, shaping her into the perfect weapon. Every woman you hired, every scar you thought you could protect, she's been my eyes and hands, destroying them one by one." Maggie's vision blurred. Karen Brennan wasn't just a corrupt executive, she was David's creature, molded by him, aimed at everything Maggie held sacred. Another message followed immediately. "She doesn't even know she's mine, thinks her cruelty is her own choice. But I planted every seed of hatred, watered every doubt. The best weapons are the ones that don't know they're being used." The final message made her knees buckle. "Run home, broken doll. Time for our reunion." Karen Brennan wasn't just a predator who'd infiltrated her sanctuary. She was David's weapon, forged in his image, aimed at destroying every woman Maggie had tried to save. The implications crashed over her in waves. Every hiring decision, every policy protecting scarred and wounded employees, every carefully crafted safe space. David had been watching it all, learning, planning, using her own compassion as the blueprint for systematic destruction. How long? The question carved through her like acid. How long had Karen been his creature? How many brilliant women had been driven away, their confidence shattered, their careers destroyed, While Maggie sat in her penthouse believing she was building something beautiful, she thought of Sarah Henderson, washing her hands with methodical precision, wondering if the fight was worth it. Of Dr. Elizabeth Winters, her genius questioned because clients found her scars uncomfortable. Of Rebecca Torres, whose testimony had helped convict David, now working under his weapon's daily threats. They'd all been lambs led to slaughter by Maggie's own good intentions. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before her, each fluorescent light a harsh interrogation bulb exposing her failures. Through glass conference room walls, she could see Karen meeting with a group of department heads, her gestures animated, her smile brilliant, playing her role perfectly while poison dripped from every word. Maggie ducked into an empty office, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls closed in as 23 years of certainty crumbled around her. She thought escaping David was about survival, about building something better from the ashes of her destroyed life. But there had been no escape, no victory, only a longer, crueler game where her every triumph became ammunition for his revenge. The burner phone buzzed again. "Getting close to the truth now, aren't you? How does it feel knowing that every woman you saved I destroyed, that your greatest kindness became my greatest weapon?" Her fingers trembled as she read, but the message continued. Rebecca Torres. "Remember how she testified for you, how brave she was standing up to the big bad professor? I found her 3 months later." Amazing how quickly confidence crumbles when someone reminds you that scars make you vulnerable. She learned to keep quiet. They all did. Maggie's vision blurred. Rebecca's scars, the careful way she held herself, the recognition in her eyes when she'd spoken about women who've survived things. Another message arrived like a physical blow. Angela Martinez believed you'd protect her. Sarah Henderson thought intelligence mattered more than appearance. Elizabeth Winters trusted that brilliance would triumph over beauty. Want to know what each of them told me when I explained how wrong they were? How their savior was just another scarred woman hiding in shadows? The phone slipped from her hands, clattering across the office floor, but she could still see the screen, still read the words that followed. "They all broke eventually, just like you did, just like you will again." Maggie pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the flood of images. Every hire she'd celebrated, every policy victory, every moment she'd felt proud of creating something meaningful. All of it tainted now, poisoned by the knowledge that David had been orchestrating the destruction from the beginning. But underneath the devastation, something harder was crystallizing, a cold fury that tasted like blood and burned like acid. She'd spent 23 years building walls to protect the wounded, creating policies, fostering environments, hiring brilliant women others had discarded. She'd believed in something beautiful, something pure. David had taken that belief and weaponized it, turned her compassion into a hunting ground for his cruelty. The phone buzzed one final time. "Penthouse, midnight. Come alone, or I'll make sure everyone knows that Margaret Chen's death was just another lie, that the great protector of damaged women was just as broken and pathetic as the rest of them. Time to finish what we started, my broken doll. Time to complete the masterpiece." Maggie stared at the message until the words burned into her retinas. Then, slowly, she picked herself up from the office floor. She'd been playing defense for 23 years, building, protecting, hiding, but predators only understood one language. The elevator dinged softly as she pressed the button for the executive floor. In its polished walls, her reflection looked different now. Not just scarred, but dangerous. Not just broken, but weaponized by her own pain. Margaret Chen was supposed to be dead. Perhaps it was time to let her die properly, and time to let something hungrier take her place. The elevator shuddered to a stop at the 42nd floor, her floor. Margaret Chen's floor, where the reclusive billionaire had supposedly drawn her final breath this morning while her broken doppelganger scrubbed toilets 40 floors below. The door slid open with a whisper. The penthouse stretched before her in darkness, Seattle's rain-blurred lights casting shifting shadows across furniture she'd chosen herself, but rarely seen in person. Everything exactly as she'd left it during her last video call, yet transformed by the knowledge that it had been a stage set all along, a backdrop for David's final act. "You're early," the voice came from her leather chair, the one positioned to catch the city lights. David's silhouette was wrong, somehow too thin, angular in places that should have been familiar. 23 years had changed them both. "I'm not early," Maggie said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I'm 23 years late." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Always were dramatic, Margaret, even when you were begging me not to hit you." The casual cruelty hit exactly as intended, but something had changed in the elevator. The woman who'd spent decades building walls around her trauma wasn't the one standing here now. Turn on the lights, David. I prefer the dark. It's more honest, don't you think? No hiding behind makeup or surgery or corporate power. The chair creaked as he leaned forward. Just truth. Maggie found the wall switch, flooding the room with harsh fluorescence. The man in her chair was David, but David rebuilt from nightmare and surgical steel. The left side of his face was a patchwork of grafts and scars, worse than anything she carried. But it was his eyes that made her step backward, the same calculating coldness, now sharpened by decades of carefully cultivated hatred. Surprised? He stood slowly, favoring his left leg. The car didn't quite finish the job, but it gave me time to think, time to plan something comprehensive. Karen, Maggie said, my masterpiece. His ruined face attempted a smile. Do you know how easy it is to shape someone's hatred when you understand their wounds? Karen's mother abandoned her for being difficult. Her first husband left her for someone prettier. All I had to do was convince her that beautiful women were the enemy, that scarred women were just beautiful, women too cowardly to admit their failure. The words hit like physical blows, each one rewriting years of assumptions. She doesn't know who you are. Of course not. That would ruin the art of it. David circled her like a predator, his limp lending an odd rhythm to his steps. She thinks her cruelty is righteous, that she's protecting the company from undesirable elements. I just provided the philosophy, the reasoning, the methods. Maggie's mind raced through every interaction she'd witnessed between Karen and the women she'd hired. The systematic degradation, the clinical precision of each attack. 23 years, she whispered. 23 years, he confirmed. While you hid behind screens and fake deaths, I built something beautiful. A weapon that destroys everything you touch without even knowing why. Every woman you hired, every policy you created, every small kindness you thought would matter, all of it feeding my design. But as David spoke, revealing his elaborate revenge with the pride of an artist unveiling his masterwork, Maggie realized something that made the room tilt on its axis. She wasn't afraid anymore. The woman who'd fled his apartment with a shattered face and broken ribs had spent 23 years becoming something else, building companies, making decisions that affected thousands of lives, surviving assassination attempts and death threats, and the daily weight of running an empire. David was still the same man who'd needed to break women to feel powerful. You want to know the beautiful part? David continued, lost in his own narrative triumph. Even when I'm gone, it will continue. Karen will keep destroying them because that's who she is now. My gift to you will outlive us both. He moved closer, his scarred face inches from hers. You created nothing, Margaret. You saved no one. You're still just a broken woman who couldn't keep her mouth shut about our private business. And there it was, the revelation that reframed everything, not about his plan, but about him. Our private business, Maggie repeated slowly. David's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across his features. You still think what you did to me was private, she continued, her voice growing stronger. You still think it was about you and me. For the first time in 23 years, she stepped toward him instead of away. But I didn't build this company for me, David. I built it for every woman you would have destroyed next. It wasn't there. Don't, he said, his voice carrying the first note of uncertainty she'd ever heard from him. Don't try to rewrite history. You ran because you were weak. You hid because you were broken. But Maggie was already moving, not away, but closer, claiming space in her own sanctuary that he'd turned into a trap. I ran because staying would have meant you'd eventually kill me, and then you couldn't hurt anyone else through me. Through you? David's laugh came out strangled. You think this was about other people? This was about teaching you that women like Sarah Henderson don't deserve to feel safe at work? That brilliance like Elizabeth Winters should be hidden because it comes in a scarred package? Maggie's voice cut through his protest like steel through silk. You spent 23 years proving my point, David. You just never understood what the point was. The room seemed to shrink around them, Seattle's skyline pressing against the windows like curious eyes. David backed toward her desk, his limp more pronounced now, his breathing shallow. Karen destroyed them, he insisted, clinging to his narrative like a life preserver. Every single woman you tried to save. She broke them down piece by piece while you watched through your cameras. Helpless. Karen damaged them, Maggie corrected, and something in her tone made him stop talking. But they're still here, aren't they? Still working, still fighting, still surviving despite everything you orchestrated. She thought of Sarah in the bathroom, checking locks but refusing to quit. Of Elizabeth, standing up to Karen despite the threats. Of Rebecca, carrying 23 years of trauma but still testifying, still working, still breathing defiance into every day. You turned my head of HR into a weapon, Maggie continued, but you couldn't turn my company into a killing field, because the women I hired aren't victims waiting to be saved, David. They're survivors who already saved themselves. David's back hit her desk, and for the first time in their shared history, he was the one trapped while she advanced. This isn't, you don't understand what I accomplished. The psychological precision, the systematic dismantling, you accomplished exactly what I knew you would. The words came from somewhere deep and certain, a place that had been building pressure for 23 years. You proved that, given infinite time, infinite resources, and a perfectly placed weapon, you could make life uncomfortable for women who are already experts in surviving the impossible. His scarred face went white beneath the surgical grafts. Uncomfortable? I destroyed careers, shattered confidence, and they rebuilt, every single time. Maggie's smile felt like something forged in fire. Do you know what that means, David? It means you spent 2 decades orchestrating the most elaborate proof imaginable that the women you target are stronger than you are. The silence stretched between them like a chasm opening in reality itself. Through the windows, Seattle's rain painted patterns of light and shadow across walls that had witnessed the death of one woman and the birth of something infinitely more dangerous. This was supposed to break you, David whispered, and the admission sounded like air escaping from a punctured lung. It did break me. Maggie reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the burner phone. 23 years ago, you shattered every assumption I had about safety, about trust, about the world being fundamentally fair to women who just wanted to exist without fear. She held up the phone, its screen reflecting the harsh fluorescent light. But broken things have sharp edges, David, and I've had 23 years to learn how to cut. His eyes fixed on the device, understanding beginning to dawn across his features like a terrible sunrise. You knew. How long have you known? About Karen being your creature? About you orchestrating the threats, the systematic targeting? Maggie set the phone on the desk between them, a small black rectangle that contained the evidence of his entire conspiracy. I suspected for months. The patterns were too precise, too personal, but I needed to be certain before I acted. Before you acted? The question came out strangled. Before I gave you enough rope to hang yourself with. Maggie's voice carried the weight of boardroom decisions and midnight calculations. Every text you sent, every threat you made, every detail you revealed about your grand design, it's all been recorded, David, documented, prepared for distribution to exactly the right people at exactly the right moment. The trapped animal look in his eyes was almost satisfying, almost enough to balance 23 years of looking over her shoulder. Karen doesn't know she's your weapon, Maggie continued, but she's about to learn, along with every employee, every board member, every business partner who ever wondered why Margaret Chen was so passionate about protecting scarred women. David's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, the puppet master finally understanding that he'd been dancing to someone else's strings. They're going to know exactly what kind of monster you really are. You can't, he breathed, but the words carried no conviction. Karen will deny everything. There's no proof of connection. Karen Brennan, employee number 47,291, hired 6 months after my supposed death by a consulting firm that no longer exists. Maggie's voice carried the precision of a scalpel finding exactly the right vein. A firm whose only client was a shell company funded through accounts traced to the settlement from your car accident. The accident that should have killed you, but left you just broken enough to want revenge. David's face went ashen beneath the surgical patchwork. How could you possibly know about the money trail, the fake credentials, the psychological profile Karen underwent before her hiring, a profile that identified her specific triggers around abandonment and appearance-based trauma? Maggie stepped closer, her reflection multiplying in the dark windows behind him. I've known about Karen for 3 years, David. I've been documenting every interaction, every degrading comment, every systematic attack on the women I hired specifically, because they reminded me of who I used to be. The room seemed to contract around them, the weight of Seattle's skyline pressing against glass that suddenly felt fragile as eggshells. David's breathing came in short, sharp gasps, the predator finally understanding he'd been circling bait in a trap. But the beautiful part, Maggie continued, her words echoing his earlier triumph with surgical precision, isn't just that I have evidence, it's what happens next. She reached for her laptop, fingers dancing across keys with the fluidity of someone who'd built an empire through electronic intermediaries. The screen blazed to life, displaying a document titled The Brennan Files, a 23-year conspiracy. Every email Karen sent, every performance review she weaponized, Every brilliant woman she tried to destroy, all of it documented alongside the financial records that trace back to you.
Maggie's smile carried the sharp satisfaction of justice finally finding its target. But more than that, David, screenshots of your text messages, audio recordings of your phone calls to Karen's personal line, video surveillance from every building where you've met with her over the years.
David's legs gave out, sending him sliding down the desk to the floor. You can't have the statute of limitations. There's no crime in hiring someone. Conspiracy to commit workplace harassment, systematic psychological abuse, financial fraud through the shell companies, identity fraud for the fake death certificate you helped arrange. Each charge fell like a hammer blow. And that's just the federal level. The state charges are even more interesting. The laptop screen shifted, displaying a video file labeled Security Footage, Stratton Industries Parking Garage, October 15th, 11:47 p.m. David's face appeared in grainy black and white, clearly visible as he handed an envelope to Karen Brennan beside her car. You got careless, Maggie observed. After 23 years of patience, you got excited, started taking risks because you thought the end game was so close you could taste it. But it was the next document that made David's remaining color drain completely. A legal brief bearing the seal of the King County Prosecutor's Office, dated today, signed by Rebecca Torres, the same Rebecca Torres whose confidence he'd boasted about destroying. She's a prosecutor now, Maggie said softly. The woman whose testimony helped convict you 23 years ago. The woman Karen has been systematically tormenting under your guidance. She's been investigating corporate fraud cases for the past 5 years, and she's very, very good at her job. David's scarred face crumpled like paper in flames. Rebecca doesn't know. She can't know it's me. She knows everything. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, sending ripples of devastation across David's features. She's known for months. We've been working together, David. The scared graduate student you broke and the scarred woman you tried to kill, we've been building this case together. The penthouse fell silent, except for the soft percussion of rain against windows and David's ragged breathing. Outside, Seattle's lights blurred and shifted like stars seen through tears, and Maggie felt something she hadn't experienced in 23 years. The absolute certainty that the monster in her past would never hurt anyone again. The warrants are already signed, she continued, her voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. Karen's being arrested as we speak. The shell companies are being dissolved. Your assets are being frozen. And every woman you targeted through her is being contacted by victim services coordinators who understand exactly what they've been through. David looked up at her from the floor, his face a ruin of surgical scars and dawning comprehension. You've destroyed everything. No, Maggie corrected, and her smile carried the sharp satisfaction of justice finally served. I've just finished what you started 23 years ago. Everything you built will collapse. The scandal will make me stronger. The admission stopped him mid-sentence. Every survivor who learns what happened here will know that someone fought back, that someone won. You hear that? David Carver, Morrison said, his voice carrying official weight. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit workplace harassment, financial fraud, and violation of a restraining order that's been in effect for 23 years. As the handcuffs clicked into place, David looked back at Maggie one last time. This doesn't change what happened to you. No, she agreed, watching them lead him toward the elevator. But it changes what happens next. The penthouse emptied slowly, taking statements and evidence and the poisonous presence that had haunted these walls for hours. When the last detective left, Maggie found herself alone with Seattle's skyline and the sound of rain that no longer seemed like tears. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Henderson heard the news. Thank you for fighting back. Then Elizabeth Winters, the whole department is talking. We always knew you were protecting us, but we never knew how much. Then Rebecca Torres, justice served. Finally. And dozens more women whose names appeared on Karen's systematic hit lists. Women who'd survived professional assassination attempts without ever knowing they were soldiers in someone else's war. Women who were now free to build their own empires without looking over their shoulders. Maggie walked to her desk, running her fingers across the surface where David's hands had left their final marks. Tomorrow, there would be press conferences and board meetings and the complex work of rebuilding trust within a company that had harbored a weapon designed to destroy its most vulnerable employees. But tonight, for the first time in 23 years, Margaret Chen could turn on all the lights in her sanctuary and know that no monster was waiting in the shadows. She picked up her phone and made a video call, not to a board member or department head, but to the trauma counselor she'd been seeing for 2 decades. When the call connected, she did something revolutionary. She turned on her camera, "Hello, Dr. Martinez," she said, her scarred face filling the screen like a declaration of war against shame. "I think it's time we talked about what comes after surviving." Through the window, Seattle sparkled like scattered diamonds, and every light represented someone going home safely to people who loved them despite their scars, their fears, their perfectly imperfect humanity. The monster was finally truly gone, and Margaret Chen, survivor, empire builder, protector of the wounded, was ready to discover who she could become when she wasn't looking over her shoulder. The rain continued falling, but now it sounded like applause.